The stagecoach lurched to a halt outside Cedar Ridge's weathered depot, dust swirling in the late afternoon sun. Maribel Grace Holloway gathered her modest traveling dress and stepped down, her black mourning attire drawing immediate attention from the handful of townsfolk lingering near the platform. She carried only 2 worn carpet bags and a small trunk, everything she owned in this world. The driver handed down her belongings with practiced efficiency, tipping his hat. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge, ma'am. Ain't much, but it's honest folk here." She nodded, offering a faint smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Thank you, sir." As the stagecoach rumbled away, Maribel stood alone on the wooden platform, surveying her new home. Cedar Ridge sprawled before her, a collection of sun-bleached buildings huddled against the vast Wyoming prairie. The main street stretched perhaps 200 yards, lined with the essentials general store, saloon, blacksmith, bank, and at the far end, a small white church with a crooked steeple. Mrs. Holloway. She turned to find a stern-faced woman approaching, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. This would be Mrs. Elmira Patterson, head of the school board. "Yes, I'm Maribel Holloway." "Thought so. Only expecting one new arrival today." The woman's sharp eyes took in Maribel's morning dress. "My condolences on your loss. Heard your husband was a minister back in Missouri." "He was—" Maribel kept her voice steady, though her fingers tightened on the handle of her carpet bag. "Mrs." Patterson waited, clearly expecting more, but Maribel offered nothing else. After an uncomfortable pause, the older woman cleared her throat. "Well then, I'll show you to the schoolhouse. You'll be staying in the quarters attached. It ain't fancy, but it's clean and dry." They walked in silence down the dusty main street, Maribel aware of curious eyes peering from windows and doorways. News traveled fast in small towns, and she had no doubt her story had already made the rounds, or at least the version they'd pieced together from fragments of truth. "School starts Monday," Mrs. Patterson said as they approached a modest building near the edge of town. 23 students, ages 6 through 16. Their last teacher left sudden-like to care for her ailing mother back east. "We've been making do with volunteers, but the children need proper instruction." The schoolhouse was simple but well-maintained, with real glass windows and a small bell tower. Attached to one side was a tiny residence, 2 rooms and a kitchen that would serve as Maribel's home. The previous teacher left some supplies. Mrs. Patterson continued, unlocking the door. "Slate boards, primers, arithmetic books. The older students have been sharing McGuffey readers, though we could use more copies." Maribel stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of chalk dust and wood polish. For a moment, she could almost pretend things were as they'd always been, that she was simply starting a new teaching position, that Samuel would join her in a few weeks once he'd settled affairs with his congregation. But Samuel was gone, and with him, everything she'd once believed. "I should mention," Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through her thoughts. "Cedar Ridge is a God-fearing town. The church has been without a regular minister for some years now. Traveling preachers come through every few months, but folks still expect certain proprieties." Maribel met her gaze directly. "I understand, Mrs. Patterson. I'm here to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. Nothing more." The older woman's lips pursed. "Good, because some folks are already talking. A minister's widow who don't attend services, well, tongues will wag." After Mrs. Patterson left, Maribel unpacked her few belongings in the small bedroom. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed Samuel's Bible on the nightstand. She couldn't bring herself to leave it behind, though she hadn't opened it in months. Next to it, she set their wedding photograph, his kind face forever frozen in sepia tones. That first night in Cedar Ridge, she sat at the small kitchen table and wrote in her journal, "I am here. I am alive. I am alone. Tomorrow I will rise, wash my face, and pretend to be whole. For now, that must be enough." Sunday came too quickly. Maribel woke to the sound of church bells echoing across the prairie. She lay in bed, listening to the familiar call that had once structured her entire life. Through her window, she could see families making their way down the street in their Sunday best. Children scrubbed clean and wives carrying covered dishes for the after-service meal. She rose and dressed, but not for church. Instead, she took inventory of the schoolhouse, organizing desks and cleaning slate boards. Let them talk. She had work to do. By afternoon, the whispers had already started. Mrs. Jameson from the general store made a point of stopping by, ostensibly to deliver a welcome basket, but really to probe for information. "Such a shame about your husband, dear," she said, eyes bright with curiosity. "A minister. Wasn't he must be hard, being in a church town without him?" "Yes," Maribel replied, accepting the basket with genuine gratitude despite recognizing the fishing expedition for what it was. "Thank you for your kindness. Will we see you at services next week? I'm sure folks would love to hear about your husband's ministry work." "Perhaps," Maribel said, though they both knew it was a lie. After Mrs. Jameson left, Maribel found a note tucked between two preserves jars in the basket. "Faith untended withers like wheat in drought. A friend." She crumpled the note and tossed it in the stove. Monday morning brought her first real test. 23 young faces stared at her with varying degrees of interest, suspicion, and mischief. She recognized the look every new teacher faced it, but there was something else in their expressions, a wariness that came from adult gossip filtering down to young ears. "Good morning, class. I'm Mrs. Holloway, your new teacher." A boy near the back, perhaps 12 years old, raised his hand. "Ma'am, is it true you don't believe in God no more?" The directness of children. Maribel kept her expression neutral. "What's your name?" "Thomas, ma'am. Thomas Hartley." "Well, Thomas, I'm here to teach you reading, writing, arithmetic, and perhaps some history and geography. What I believe or don't believe about anything else isn't part of your lessons. Now, shall we begin with seeing where each of you stands in your studies?" The day passed in a blur of assessment and organization. Some students were further along than she'd expected, others struggling with basic letters. One boy, sitting alone in the back corner, hadn't spoken at all. When she checked the register, she found his name Elijah McCrae, age 8. "Can you read, Elijah?" she asked gently during the lunch break. He nodded, but didn't meet her eyes. She noticed his clothes were clean, but mended with clumsy stitches. His hair roughly cut as if someone had done it at home with sheep shears. As the weeks passed, Maribel settled into a rhythm. She rose early, prepared lessons, taught her students, and retired to her small quarters. She avoided the main street on Sundays, taking long walks on the prairie instead, while the rest of the town gathered for worship. The whispers followed her everywhere. "Minister's widow who won't set foot in church." Must have been something terrible to turn her from God. What kind of example is that for the children? But her students were learning. Even quiet Elijah had begun to show progress. Though he still barely spoke, she noticed he walked home alone each day, heading west toward the rangeland rather than into town like the other children. One evening, as she graded papers by lamplight, Maribel found herself reaching for Samuel's Bible. She opened it to where they'd pressed flowers from their wedding between the pages larkspur and prairie roses, now brown and brittle. His neat handwriting filled the margins with notes for sermons he'd never give. She closed it quickly, the familiar ache spreading through her chest. How could she explain to these people that it wasn't God she'd stopped believing in, but His mercy that when her husband's horse spooked at a rattlesnake, throwing him against the rocks, her prayers had dissolved into the wind like dust. Samuel had been so certain of providence in all things. "God's plan, Maribel," he'd say with that gentle smile. "We may not understand, but we must trust." But what kind of plan left a 28-year-old woman alone in the world? teaching other people's children while her own womb remained empty. What kind of plan took a good man in his prime and left behind the gamblers, drunks, and cheats? She'd asked these questions until they'd worn grooves in her soul, and the only answer was silence. Cedar Ridge had its own ghosts, she learned. The abandoned church at the end of Main Street had been without a regular minister for 7 years, ever since Reverend Mathis had succumbed to influenza, along with a quarter of the town. Traveling preachers held services when they passed through, but the building stood empty most Sundays, its door unlocked for anyone seeking solitude. It was there Maribel found herself one rain-soaked Thursday afternoon, having dismissed school early when the storm turned fierce. She'd only meant to wait out the worst of the weather, but the familiar scent of old wood and musty hymnals pulled her inside. The pews were dusty but intact, rain drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. She walked slowly down the aisle, remembering countless similar walks beside Samuel, his voice raised in prayer and song. At the back of the church, she noticed fresh mud on the floor near the last pew. Someone else had been here recently, seeking shelter or something more. She sat in the second-to-last row, closing her eyes and listening to the storm. "I'm not praying," she whispered to the empty church. "I'm just sitting." The rain continued, and Maribel sat in the gathering darkness, a minister's widow who couldn't find her way back to faith, in a town that measured a woman's worth by her presence in these very pews. When she finally returned home, soaked despite her umbrella, she found a covered dish on her doorstep, chicken and dumplings from some anonymous neighbor. Kindness and judgment intertwined, like everything else in Cedar Ridge. That night, she wrote another letter she'd never send. Asterisk. "Dear Samuel, they think I've lost faith because I lost you. They don't understand that I lost faith because God didn't lose you. He took you, and He won't tell me why. Your Maribel asterisk." She folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others in the drawer of her nightstand. Another prayer that would never find its destination. The October rain came sudden and fierce that Sunday, catching Maribel halfway through her prairie walk. She'd wandered farther than usual, lost in thought while the town gathered for visiting preacher's service. Now the sky opened with vengeance, soaking through her wool shawl in moments. The abandoned church stood closer than her schoolhouse. She ran for it, holding her skirts above the forming mud, raindrops stinging her face like tiny needles. The door gave way easily under her push, and she stumbled inside, gasping. She wasn't alone. A man sat in the very last pew. So still she might have missed him in the dim light if not for the slight turn of his head at her entrance. He didn't speak, merely acknowledged her presence with a brief nod before returning his gaze to some fixed point ahead. Maribel hesitated, water dripping from her clothes onto the dusty floor. She should leave being alone with a man, even in a church, would only fuel more gossip. But the rain hammered harder against the windows, and pride seemed a luxury she couldn't afford while shivering in soaked garments. She chose a pew several rows ahead, far enough for propriety's sake. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she could make out more of the stranger. Broad shoulders, work-worn clothes, dark hair that needed cutting. His hands rested on his knees, large hands, scarred from labor. They sat in silence, listening to the rain's percussion on the roof. Minutes stretched like hours. Maribel found herself oddly comforted by the presence of another soul who sought shelter here rather than in the warmth of communal worship. The storm's fury gradually spent itself, fading to a gentle patter. She rose to leave, smoothing her damp skirts, when his voice stopped her. "Ma'am." Just that single word, rough as sandpaper. She turned. "Your shawl's soaked through. Take this." He held out a worn leather coat, not moving from his seat. "I couldn't." "Got a ways to walk yet. No sense catching your death." Something in his tone brooked no argument. She accepted the coat, its weight surprising, smelling of horses and hay and honest work. "Thank you, Mr. McCrae." Asa McCrae. McCrae. Her mind made the connection. You're Elijah's father. A flicker of something surprise perhaps crossed his weathered features. You're the new schoolmarm, Mrs. Holloway. It wasn't a question. She nodded, pulling his coat closer. Elijah's a good boy. Quiet, but bright. Gets that from his mother. The words came flat, matter of fact, but she heard the weight beneath them. I should go, Maribel said. Thank you again for the coat. I'll have Elijah bring it tomorrow. No need. I'll come by for it sometime. She left him there in the last pew, still as a statue, staring at nothing, or perhaps at everything he'd lost. The walk home seemed shorter wrapped in his coat. It smelled of the life she'd glimpsed: horses, leather, hay, the faint trace of wood smoke. A widower's coat, she realized, recognizing the careful mending at the elbows, the missing button replaced with one that didn't quite match. That evening, as she hung the coat to dry by her stove, Maribel found herself thinking about Asa McCrae. She knew his story in broad strokes. Everyone in Cedar Ridge knew everyone's business. His wife Clara had died in a prairie fire 3 years past, trying to save their horses. He'd raised Elijah alone since then, running cattle and breaking horses on a spread west of town. The coat dried by morning, but Maribel hesitated to send it with Elijah. Some instinct held her back, though she couldn't say why. 3 days passed before she saw Asa again. She was dismissing the children when he appeared at the schoolhouse door, hat in hand, in daylight. She could see him more clearly, tall and lean, with the permanent squint of a man who spent his days under the prairie sun. His face bore the weathering of hard years, though she guessed him to be not much older than her own 30 years. Mrs. Holloway. Mr. McCrae, I have your coat. She retrieved it from the hook by her desk, aware of curious young eyes watching the exchange. He took it with a nod. Obliged. Then, after a pause, Elijah giving you any trouble? Not at all. He's one of my best students. She glanced at the boy, who stood apart from the other children, waiting. Though I wish he'd speak up more in class. He don't talk much since... Asa stopped, jaw tightening. Well, he don't talk much. An awkward silence stretched between them. The other children had scattered to their homes, leaving only Elijah, patient as a young oak. I should mention, Maribel said carefully, his clothes could use some mending. I'd be happy to... We manage fine. The words came sharp, defensive, then softer. But I thank you for the offer. He settled his hat and turned to go, Elijah falling into step beside him. Father and son walked away together, their matching strides kicking up small clouds of dust. The following Sunday brought rain again, gentler this time. Maribel found herself walking toward the abandoned church without conscious decision. She told herself she sought shelter. Nothing more, but her feet knew better. He was there, in the same pew, same posture. This time she sat closer, only 3 rows ahead. Seems we're creatures of habit, she said quietly. Seems so. They lapsed into silence. But it felt different from the first time, less strange, more companionable. 2 souls who couldn't bear the fellowship of saints, finding solace in emptiness. Why here? She asked eventually. Why not home? Or... Could ask you the same. Fair enough. She considered her words. I can't sit where I used to sit, can't sing what I used to sing, can't pray what I used to pray. But you still come. To the building, not to, this isn't worship. He made a sound that might have been agreement. Clara loved this place, sang in the choir, taught Sunday school, had faith enough for both of us. The past tense hung heavy between them. Now I sit here and try to remember why it mattered to her, like trying to read a book in a language I never learned. Maribel turned to look at him fully. His profile was sharp against the dim light, carved by loss into something hard and enduring. My husband used to say faith was like breathing natural, necessary, unconscious until it stops. She wrapped her arms around herself. I've been holding my breath for 10 months. 3 years, he said simply. You learned to live without air. They sat until the rain stopped. 2 people drowning on dry land, sharing the strange comfort of mutual suffocation. When Maribel rose to leave, Asa spoke again. Same time next week. It wasn't quite a question, wasn't quite a statement. She understood. They weren't making plans or building friendship. They were simply acknowledging what was 2 people who would be here regardless. Might as well be here together. If it rains, she said, even if it don't. She left first. He always stayed longer. Walking home, Maribel wondered what the town would say if they knew. The godless widow and the grieving rancher, sitting in an empty church, saying nothing and everything. But Cedar Ridge didn't know, and so their strange Sunday ritual continued. Sometimes they talked simple things, safe things, the price of grain, the early frost, how Elijah had correctly spelled Mississippi on his slate. Sometimes they just sat, letting the silence say what words couldn't. One afternoon in November, Asa surprised her. You were right about the mending. She looked over to see him holding up his arm, where a fresh tear in his shirt sleeve gaped open. Did it myself, he said with grim pride. Made it worse. Despite herself, Maribel smiled the first real smile in months. Bring it next week. I'll show you proper stitching. Don't want charity. Not charity, trade. You can teach me to light the stove without smoking out the schoolhouse. He almost smiled then, just a slight lifting at the corner of his mouth. Deal. They shook on it, the brief contact of hands both strange and natural. 2 people who'd forgotten how to be touched, remembering slowly. Winter crept closer, and their Sundays became a fixed point in Maribel's week. Not salvation, not healing, just presence. 2 people sitting at the edge of faith's absence, finding that emptiness shared was somehow less empty. She still didn't pray. He still stared at nothing, but they did it together, and that was something. Maybe it was even enough. The small house felt colder as December settled over Cedar Ridge. Maribel had grown accustomed to the prairie winters during her years with Samuel, but this was her first facing them alone. She kept the stove burning through the night, wrapped in quilts that still smelled faintly of their old life in Missouri. It was during these long evenings that she maintained her strange ritual writing letters to a dead man. The stack in her drawer had grown thick, each one a conversation with silence. Asterisk, Dear Samuel. Asterisk. The inkwell froze again last night. I remembered how you used to warm it by the fire, warning me about cracked glass. Small mercies we never notice until they're gone. Like so many things. Asterisk, your Maribel asterisk. She folded the letter carefully, adding it to the others. Tomorrow she'd write another, and another after that. Some widows kept photographs or pressed flowers. She kept words never sent, prayers never heard. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts, firm but not demanding. She found Asa McCrae on her doorstep, snow dusting his shoulders, holding something wrapped in brown paper. Evening, Mrs. Holloway. Sorry to call so late. Is everything all right, is Elijah? Boy's fine. This is... He shifted uncomfortably, then thrust the package toward her. Found this cleaning out the old parsonage shed. Thought you might could use it. Inside the wrapping was a leather-bound book of sermons, its pages yellowed but intact. The frontispiece bore an inscription, Property of Reverend Mathis, Cedar Ridge Methodist Church. I can't accept this, Maribel said, though her fingers traced the worn cover gently. Ain't no use to anyone gathering dust. Figured a minister's widow might appreciate it. Asterisk, former minister's wife. She thought but didn't say, Would you like to come in, coffee still warm? He hesitated, glancing at the darkened windows of neighboring houses. That wouldn't be proper, ma'am. Neither is standing in the cold. She stepped aside. Please. He entered reluctantly, removing his hat and hanging it precisely on the hook by the door. The small kitchen seemed smaller with him in it, his presence filling the space in a way that wasn't entirely uncomfortable. She poured coffee while he sat stiffly at her table, hands wrapped around the warm mug like a man trying to thaw frozen fingers. "Elijah talks about you," he said suddenly. "Well, not talks exactly, but he writes. Shows me his papers sometimes, Mrs. Holloway says this. Mrs. Holloway showed us that. He's a good student, one of my brightest. His mother was smart, read everything she could get her hands on." Asa stared into his coffee. "I ain't much for books myself. Work better with my hands." "There are different kinds of intelligence. Mr. McCrae. Elijah tells me you can track a stray calf through a thunderstorm and fix anything that breaks." He said that. Wrote it, actually, for an assignment about someone they admire. Something shifted in his weathered face, surprise, perhaps, or a deeper emotion quickly suppressed. "Boys should admire better men than me." "Should he?" They drank in silence for a moment. Through the window, snow began falling harder, erasing the world in white. "I should go," Asa said, rising. "Storm's getting worse." At the door, he paused. "That book don't feel obliged to keep it. Just thought, well, seemed wrong to let it rot." After he left, Maribel sat with the book of sermons in her lap. She opened it randomly, finding notes in Reverend Mathis's careful hand. One passage was heavily underlined. "Faith is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to trust despite it." She closed the book quickly, as if it might burn her fingers. The next evening brought another knock, softer, hesitant. She opened the door to find Elijah McCrae, a covered dish in his small hands. "Pa sent this," the boy said quietly. "Said you might not be cooking, what with grading papers and all." She accepted the dish, still warm. "Thank your father for me. Would you like to come in while I write him a note?" Elijah nodded, stepping carefully over the threshold, while Maribel uncovered the dish venison stew. Rich and savory, the boy studied her small home with curious eyes. "You got a lot of books," he observed. "I do. Would you like to borrow one?" His eyes widened. "Pa might not." "I'll write him a note about that, too. Every boy should have books at home." She selected carefully Robinson Crusoe, sturdy and adventure-filled, likely to appeal without being too challenging. Elijah held it like precious crystal. While she wrote the thank you note, he asked quietly, "Mrs. Holloway, why don't you come to church?" The question every adult wanted to ask but didn't dare. Trust a child to voice it plain. "That's a complicated question. Elijah." "Pa don't go neither. He just sits in the empty one." "I know. Maybe that counts as going from the mouths of babes." "Maybe it does." When Elijah left with his book and her note, Maribel allowed herself to taste the stew. It was good, simple, hearty, warming. The kind of meal a man learned to make when he had a child to feed and no woman to help. She ate slowly, thinking about kindness delivered by small hands, about men who couldn't accept help but could give it, about the ways people took care of each other without admitting that's what they were doing. Later, she wrote another letter. Dear Samuel. A widower sent me stew tonight. His boy delivered it, proud as a young rooster. I think you would have liked them both, the father rough as bark but good beneath, the son bright and quiet as a winter morning. I'm teaching again, not preaching, as you did, just letters and numbers. But sometimes I think I see your gentle way in how I speak to the shy ones, your patience in how I wait for understanding to dawn. Is this how it happens? Not forgetting, but learning to remember without drowning. Your Maribel. The next Sunday, she arrived at the empty church to find Asa had already lit the stove. Warmth crept through the cold space, pushing back winter's grip. Thought you might appreciate not freezing, he said from his usual pew. Thank you. She sat in what had become her spot. Close enough for conversation, but far enough for propriety. And for the stew. It was delicious. Elijah showed me the book you lent. Boy read half of it already. He's welcome to borrow more when he's done. You don't have to. I want to. Books should be read, not gathering dust on shelves. He made that sound that might have been a laugh if he remembered how. You sound like Clara. It was the first time he'd said his wife's name so easily, without the weight of grief choking the syllables. Tell me about her, Maribel said softly. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she was light, everything about her. Laugh like church bells, smile that could make flowers grow in winter. Don't know what she saw in a rough piece like me, but she said I made her feel safe. And did you? Tried. Failed. The old guilt settled back over his features. Fire took her anyway. You can't protect people from living, Mr. McCrae, or from dying. Your husband, how? Horse through him, hit his head on a rock, gone before I could even reach him. The words came easier now, worn smooth by repetition. He was visiting a sick parishioner, doing God's work. Everyone said, as if that made it better somehow. Did it? No, made it worse, like God played a cruel joke taking him in the middle of serving him. They sat with their ghosts for a while, the empty church holding their grief like a cupped hand. I write him letters, Maribel admitted suddenly, surprising herself. Every night, letters he'll never read. I still make her coffee sometimes. Pour 2 cups, drink one. Leave the other till it's cold. He rubbed his face roughly. 3 years, and I still make her coffee. Maybe that's prayer, Maribel said. The real kind. Not words in a book, but habits of love with nowhere to go. Asa looked at her then. Really looked at her. And she saw her own recognition reflected in his eyes. 2 people speaking the same language of loss, finding comfort in being understood. Next week, he asked when they parted. Next week, walking home through the snow. Maribel thought about her drawer full of letters, his cups of cold coffee. The way grief became ritual became something almost like faith, not in God's plan or mercy or wisdom. Faith in continuing, in tomorrow, in the strange salvation of shared sorrow. She had one more letter to write that night. Asterisk, Dear Samuel. I'm learning a new kind of prayer. It doesn't sound like the ones you taught me. It sounds like silence shared, like stew on a cold night, like books passed between hands. Asterisk, I think you might understand. I hope you might even approve. Asterisk, your Maribel asterisk. The January wind cut sharp as glass across the schoolyard, rattling windows and sending loose papers dancing. Maribel dismissed her students early, watching them bundle into coats and scarves before braving the cold. Elijah McCrae lingered as usual, carefully packing his slate and books. Another storm coming, he said quietly, gazing out at the darkening sky. Seems so. Will your father come for you? No, ma'am. He's mending fences in the south pasture. I walk home fine. She studied the boy, 8 years old, serious as a judge, wearing a coat that had seen better days. The careful stitching at the elbows caught her eye, thread wandering like a drunk man's path. Elijah, who mends your clothes? His chin lifted slightly. Pa and me manage. The same words his father used, delivered with the same stubborn pride. After he left, Maribel sat at her desk, thinking. The boy's shirt had been patched too. She'd noticed crooked seams that would split again at the first strain. That evening, she found what she was looking for in her sewing basket, a navy blue shirt Samuel had never worn, still wrapped in paper from the tailor. She'd brought it west out of sentiment, but sentiment didn't keep children warm. The next morning, she arrived early and hung the shirt on Elijah's hook in the cloakroom, no note attached. When the boy discovered it, his eyes widened. He looked around the empty room, then carefully folded the shirt into his pack, Nothing was said, but that afternoon Elijah stayed after school to clean the blackboard without being asked. Maribel smiled to herself, understanding the language of proud people who couldn't accept gifts but could trade work for kindness. 3 days later, Asa McCrae appeared at her door just after sunset, the mended shirt in his hands. "This yours?" His voice was carefully neutral. "It was my husband's. He never wore it. We don't need—" "I know." She met his eyes steadily. "But waste is a sin, Mr. McCrae, and a shirt doing no good in my trunk might do some good on your boy's back." He stood there, torn between pride and practicality. She could see him weighing it, the needed shirt against the acceptance of charity. "I could teach you," she offered suddenly. "Proper mending, so the patches hold." "I don't—" "Saturday afternoons, after my baking, you could bring Elijah, he could read while we work." It wasn't charity if it was a trade. She saw him recognize the offer for what it was, a way to accept help while keeping his dignity intact. "I split wood," he said finally. "Noticed your pile's getting low." "Then we have an agreement." The first Saturday lesson was awkward. Asa sat stiffly at her kitchen table, his large hands clumsy with the needle. Elijah curled in the corner with the Swiss Family Robinson, occasionally peering over his book to watch his father struggle with tiny stitches. "Like this," Maribel demonstrated, her fingers guiding the needle in precise, even strokes. Small stitches last longer than large ones. "Seems backwards," Asa muttered, squinting at the fabric. "More work for the same distance." Most worthwhile things require more work than seems necessary. He glanced up at her, something shifting in his expression. "That sounds like something a minister's wife would say." "Former," she corrected quietly. "Just Maribel now?" "No," he said, returning to his stitching. "You're Mrs. Holloway, the teacher. That's something all on its own." She felt unexpected warmth at his words. They worked in companionable silence while Elijah read and the stove crackled against the cold. When Asa finally completed a straight seam, his satisfaction was almost boyish. "Look at that," he said, holding it up. "Might actually hold this time." "It will. You're a quick learner when you stop fighting the thread." He actually smiled, then just a quick flash, but genuine. "Clara used to say I fought everything like it was a wild Mustang." "Some things need gentling, not breaking." Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, understanding, recognition, the first tender shoot of something neither could name. The Saturday lessons became routine. Asa would arrive after the wood splitting, snow on his boots and sawdust in his hair. They'd work on whatever needed mending his clothes, Elijah's, even some pieces from other students whose families were struggling through the hard winter. "Don't see why you do it," Asa said one afternoon, repairing a tear in Thomas Hartley's jacket. "Boy's ma speaks poorly of you every chance she gets. Children shouldn't suffer for their parents' narrow minds." Maribel replied, "Besides, gossip can't hurt me anymore. I've already lost everything that mattered." "Not everything," he said quietly, then seemed surprised at his own words. She looked up from her sewing. "No, you're still here, still teaching, still." He gestured helplessly at the kitchen, the mending, the life she'd built from ruins, still being who you are. "And who is that?" "Someone who sees a need and fills it. Someone who don't judge a man for grieving in his own way. Someone who—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I ain't good with words." "You do fine," she said softly. The moment stretched between them, delicate as frost on a window. Then Elijah sneezed, breaking the spell, and they returned to their work. February brought a blizzard that shut down the school for 3 days. Maribel had plenty of wood, Asa had seen to that, and enough food laid by. But the silence grew heavy, and she found herself writing longer letters to Samuel. Asterisk, Dear Samuel. Asterisk, the snow has buried the world. I can't see the road from my window. Just white on white on white. It reminds me of that winter in Missouri when we were trapped for a week. You read the entire book of Psalms aloud while I mended every piece of clothing we owned. I'm mending again, but the voice beside me is different. Rougher. He doesn't read scripture, doesn't read much at all, but there's honesty in his silence that speaks louder than sermons. Asterisk. Am I betraying you by finding comfort in his company? Or would you, in your infinite kindness, be glad I'm not alone? Asterisk, asterisk. Your Maribel, asterisk. When the storm finally passed, Asa was the first to reach her door. Elijah beside him on a horse. Wanted to check you weathered it all right, he said gruffly. Boy insisted. We were worried, Elijah added, then blushed at his own boldness. I'm fine. Thank you both. She looked at their red faces, saw the effort it had taken to break through the drifts. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. They stayed an hour, warming up while Elijah excitedly told her about the ice formations on the creek and the rabbit tracks he'd found. Asa listened with quiet indulgence, occasionally correcting a detail but mostly letting the boy talk. He don't usually say this much, Asa observed when Elijah paused for breath. He's comfortable here, Maribel said simply. Ain't the only one, Asa replied, then focused intently on his coffee as if he hadn't spoken. That Sunday, their church sitting felt different. The shared experience of the storm, the growing ease between them, had shifted something fundamental. When Maribel entered, Asa nodded toward the pew beside him, not next to, but in the same row, separated by a careful foot of space. She understood the invitation and what it cost him to make it. She sat, maintaining the proper distance but close enough to feel the warmth of another human presence. Getting harder to explain, he said quietly. Why we're both here but not here. Does it need explaining? Elijah asked if we're praying. Didn't know what to tell him. Maribel considered this. Maybe we are, just not the way others expect. What kind of prayer is silence? The honest kind. When words would be lies, silence might be the truest prayer there is. He turned to look at her fully. You really were a minister's wife. I really was many things. Now I'm just trying to be. That's enough, he said firmly. Being is enough. They sat together in their separate togetherness. Two people learning that some things could be rebuilt without being repaired, that new shapes could be as strong as old ones, that silence shared could speak volumes. When they parted, Asa said, Same time next week. Yes, Maribel replied, and realized she was no longer asking if it would rain. The smell of baking bread had become Maribel's Saturday morning ritual. She'd rise before dawn, kindle the stove, and lose herself in the rhythm of kneading dough. It reminded her of peaceful times with Samuel, when life's complications could be worked out through flour and water and patient hands. By the time her students arrived for their weekly portions, she'd started the practice to ensure even the poorest children had something for the weekend. The schoolhouse would be warm and fragrant. Parents had stopped questioning her charity when she'd framed it as payment for small chores the children performed. This particular March Saturday brought unexpected warmth, the first real hint of spring. Maribel had opened the windows to let in fresh air when she heard the familiar sound of wood being split in the yard. Asa had arrived early, as he sometimes did now, working while she baked. She was shaping the last loaves when she heard a low humming drifting through the window. She paused, flour-dusted hands still. Asa was humming while he worked, an old hymn she recognized but couldn't name. The sound was rusty, uncertain, as if his throat had forgotten how to carry a tune. Moving quietly to the window, she watched him. He'd removed his jacket in the warming sun, sleeves rolled up, swinging the axe in steady rhythm, between strokes. That tentative humming continued, not joyful exactly, but not mournful either. Something in between, something healing. When he came in later, carrying an armload of split wood, she was pulling bread from the oven. Smells like heaven in here, he said, then caught himself. Smells good." She smiled at his discomfort with the casual reference to heaven. "It's just bread, Mr. McCrae, though I suppose there's something sacred in feeding people." "Clara used to say that. Said every meal was a kind of communion." He set the wood by the stove, brushing bark from his hands. She noticed he mentioned his wife more easily now, without the crushing weight that used to accompany her name. "Would you like some fresh breads best warm?" He hesitated. Their lessons were one thing, but sharing a meal felt different, more intimate. "Elijah's coming soon?" "Then we'll save him some too." She cut thick slices, found butter and the honey misses. Garrett had traded for help with her daughter's letters. They sat on the front step of the schoolhouse, plates balanced on their knees, watching the snow melt in muddy rivulets down the street. "I heard you," she said after a moment, "humming." His jaw tightened, but not in anger, more like embarrassment. "Didn't realize I was doing it." It was nice. What hymn was it? "Come Thou Fount," Clara's favorite. She used to sing it while she worked. Guess it stuck in my head all these years. Maribel knew the hymn well. Asterisk, "Come Thou Fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing Thy grace." The irony wasn't lost on either of them, two people who'd lost their tune, sitting in spring sunshine with fresh bread. "I used to sing while I baked," she offered. "Samuel said my voice could make angels jealous. Foolish man." The memory brought a smile instead of pain. "I haven't sung since—" "Maybe you should." She looked at him, surprised by the suggestion. "Not in church," he clarified quickly. "Just while you bake. Seems wrong to let good things die because of bad ones." Before she could respond, Elijah appeared around the corner, books under his arm. His face lit up at the sight of them together, then carefully schooled itself into studied casualness. "Morning, Mrs. Holloway, Pa." "There's bread inside," Maribel told him. "Help yourself, but save some for the other children." The boy scampered off, leaving them in comfortable silence. The sun climbed higher, warming their faces. "I should start on those shirts," Asa said eventually, not moving. In a moment, they sat a while longer, two people learning that some pleasures didn't require forgiveness, that bread could be shared without blessing, that humming wasn't quite singing but wasn't quite silence either. Inside, they found Elijah had carefully set out the mending supplies, his own attempt at helping. Asa ruffled his son's hair, a gesture Maribel had never seen before, and set to work on a torn shirt. "You're getting better," she observed, watching his steady stitches. "Had a decent teacher." "Decent," she feigned offense. "I'll have you know I'm the finest seamstress in Cedar Ridge." "Also the finest baker," Elijah added through a mouthful of bread. "And the only teacher who doesn't wrap knuckles," Asa said quietly. The compliment, oblique as it was, warmed her more than the sun had. They worked in companionable rhythm, Asa mending, Maribel guiding, Elijah reading aloud from his latest book when asked. The domestic scene should have ached with wrongness, these mismatched pieces trying to form a whole. Instead, it felt natural as breathing. When the Patterson boys arrived for their bread, they stopped short at the sight of the taciturn rancher sitting at their teacher's table, doing women's work with concentrated focus. Maribel saw their wide eyes, knew the gossip would fly. "Good morning, Robert, James," she said calmly. "Your bread's on the counter, wrapped in cloth." "Yes, ma'am," Robert managed, grabbing the bundle and pulling his younger brother out the door. Asa watched them go, his expression unreadable. "That'll set tongues wagging." "Let them wag. I've found gossip loses its sting when you stop caring about it." "Easy for you to say. You don't have to buy supplies from their parents." She looked at him directly. "Are you ashamed to be seen here?" "No." The answer came quick and firm. "Just don't want to make things harder for you." "Things were hard before you started coming here. At least now they're hard with company." He smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "Suppose that's one way to look at it." More children arrived throughout the morning, collecting their bread with varying degrees of curiosity about the unusual scene. Some parents lingered at the door, trying to glimpse inside without seeming obvious. Maribel greeted each one pleasantly, refusing to acknowledge their prying as anything unusual. By noon, the bread was distributed and the mending finished. Asa stood to go, Elijah reluctantly closing his book. "Thank you," Asa said at the door, "for the lesson and the bread and the humming," she suggested gently, "for not making more of it than it was. Just thank you." After they left, Maribel cleaned up slowly, thinking about the morning. She found herself humming not a hymn, just a wordless tune that seemed to rise from somewhere deep. It felt rusty in her throat, uncertain, but not unpleasant. That night, she wrote, "Dear Samuel. I hummed today while washing dishes, such a small thing, yet it felt momentous, like finding a single green shoot after a forest fire, proof that the earth remembers how to grow even when everything above has burned." A man hummed while splitting wood this morning, his wife's favorite hymn. He said, "We're teaching each other. I think how to let music back in without letting it break us." Is this healing, this careful return of small joys, your Maribel The next Saturday, she sang while she baked quietly, hesitantly, but actual words to an actual tune, an old folk song about spring returning, nothing sacred or profound. When Asa arrived to split wood, she didn't stop. Through the window, she heard him take up humming again, a different tune that somehow harmonized with hers. Not a duet, they were too far apart for that, too careful still, but two people making music in the same space, at the same time. Elijah, arriving to find both adults engaged in their separate songs, smiled wider than she'd ever seen. He didn't comment, just settled into his corner with his book, but she caught him humming too tuneless and happy, the sound of a child who felt safe. Later, as they ate bread and worked on mending, Asa said, "You have a beautiful voice." "It's not what it was." "Neither am I. Neither are any of us. Doesn't mean what's left ain't worth something." She looked at him, this man who'd entered her life as silent as a shadow, now defenders of each other's tentative songs. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't mean that at all." When the gossiping mothers arrived for their children's bread, they found the three of them working quietly, respectably. Nothing to criticize except their own suspicious minds. But Maribel knew what they couldn't see, the invisible threads of melody still hanging in the air. The careful reconstruction of joy happening one note at a time. The late March blizzard arrived without warning, catching everyone off guard. Maribel had dismissed school early when the sky turned the peculiar yellow-gray that promised serious weather. But the storm struck faster than expected. Within an hour, the wind howled like a living thing, driving snow horizontal across the prairie. She was securing the schoolhouse shutters when she heard horses outside. Asa materialized from the white swirl, leading two mounts. Elijah bundled on one of them. "Roads are already drifting shut," he shouted over the wind. "Can't make it back to the ranch." "Get inside." She held the door against the gale while they hurried the horses to the small lean-to shelter attached to the school. They stumbled into the schoolhouse, snow-covered and breathless. Elijah's face was pale with cold, his smaller body shivering despite his heavy coat. "I've got blankets in the supply closet," Maribel said, already moving. "And enough firewood for days. We'll be fine." Asa built up the fire while she wrapped Elijah in quilts, rubbing his hands between hers to restore warmth. The boy's teeth chattered, but he managed a weak smile. "This is an adventure," he said through shivers. "Some adventure," his father muttered, adding more wood to the stove. "Should have seen this coming." "No one saw this coming," Maribel assured him. "April blizzards catch everyone by surprise." As the storm intensified outside, they settled into an improvised domesticity. Maribel found her emergency supplies: crackers, dried fruit, some preserved meat. Not a feast, but enough. She heated water for tea on the stove while Asa secured loose shutters that banged in the wind. "We might be here all night," he said, returning to the warmth. "Maybe longer. Then we'll make the best of it." She handed him tea in a tin cup, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Wouldn't be the first time I've weathered a storm in a schoolhouse." They arranged themselves around the stove, Elijah curled in quilts on the bench closest to the heat, Maribel in her desk chair, Asa on an upturned crate. The wind screamed outside, but inside felt almost cozy, lit by oil lamp and stove glow. "Tell us about the other time," Elijah requested, always eager for stories. Maribel smiled at the memory. "I was about your age, maybe 9, got caught at school in Missouri during an ice storm. My teacher, Miss Crawford, had to keep 12 of us overnight. She made it seem like a grand party, told ghost stories, taught us card games, even let us draw on the blackboard." "Did you get scared?" the boy asked. "Terrified. But Miss Crawford kept saying, fear is just excitement wearing a disguise. By morning, I didn't want to leave." "Smart woman," Asa observed quietly. She's part of why I became a teacher." Maribel pulled her shawl closer. "Though I doubt she ever imagined one of her students would end up in a place like Cedar Ridge." "What's wrong with Cedar Ridge?" Elijah asked, defensive of his home. "Nothing at all. It's just different from what I expected my life to be." Asa studied her in the flickering light. "Most lives don't follow expected paths. The lucky ones find unexpected blessings." Their eyes met across the small space, and something passed between them, understanding deeper than words. Warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. As night fell, the storm showed no signs of weakening. They made beds of a sort, Elijah on the bench, covered in every quilt Maribel could find. She insisted Asa take the few cushions to make a pallet by the stove while she arranged chairs into a makeshift resting place. "This isn't proper," Asa said quietly while Elijah dozed. "Me being here overnight, people will talk." "People already talk. Besides, would propriety prefer you and Elijah frozen in a drift somewhere?" "You know what I mean." She did, a widow and widower, unchaperoned overnight even with a child present. Even in emergency circumstances, it would fuel gossip for months. "I stopped living for other people's opinions when I buried my husband," she said firmly. "I won't start again now." He nodded slowly, accepting her resolve. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm and Elijah's steady breathing. The lamplight created a small circle of warmth in the darkness, intimate as a confessional. "I wasn't there," Asa said suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. "When Clara died, I was in town, buying supplies. Saw the smoke from 5 miles off, rode hard as I could, but she'd already gone back for the horses." Maribel said nothing, knowing he needed to speak more than he needed comfort. "Found her in the barn doorway. She'd gotten 2 out before the roof beam fell. Doctor said the smoke got her before." He stopped, swallowed hard. "She loved those horses. Said every creature deserved a chance at life. She sounds remarkable. She was too good for this hard place. Too good for a rough man like me." He stared into the stove's glow. 3 years, and I still wake up expecting to find her making breakfast, humming those hymns she loved. "I write letters to Samuel," Maribel admitted. "Every night, tell him about my day, ask his advice, argue with him about scripture, as if he might write back." "Does it help?" "I don't know. Maybe it just keeps me from going mad with the silence." "The silence," he repeated. "That's the worst part. Coming home to rooms that echo." She reached across the space between them, laid her hand briefly on his. The echoes fade, eventually. They never disappear, but they soften. He turned his palm up, caught her fingers for just a moment before letting go. "That why you sit in that empty church listening for echoes?" At first, maybe. Now. She considered. Now I think I sit there because it's the one place I don't have to pretend. Don't have to smile and assure everyone I'm fine. Don't have to defend my faith or lack of it. I can just be broken. You're not broken, he said firmly. Bent, maybe, scarred, sure, but not broken. Broken things don't teach children with patience. Don't bake bread for hungry families. Don't shelter fools who should have read the weather better. A laugh surprised out of her. Is that what you are, a fool? Must be. Can't think of another reason I'd be sitting here, feeling. He stopped, shook his head. Feeling what? He met her eyes directly. Like maybe the world didn't end 3 years ago. Like maybe there's something after the after. The words hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Elijah stirred, mumbling in his sleep, and the moment passed. But something had shifted, some acknowledgement made that couldn't be taken back. They talked through the night in low voices about practical things mostly. The ranch, the school, which families were struggling, who needed help come planting season. But underneath ran a deeper current, and recognition of 2 lives slowly opening to possibility. Dawn came gray and quiet, the storm blown out. Asa went to check the horses and dig a path while Maribel made what breakfast she could from their supplies. Elijah woke cheerful as a spring robin, delighted by the adventure of spending the night at school. Can we do it again? He asked hopefully. Not if I can help it, his father replied. But his stern tone was belied by the gentle hand that ruffled the boy's hair. They made their way slowly through the fresh drifts, Asa leading the horses, Elijah riding, Maribel walking beside them. The town was just stirring, people emerging to dig out from the storm. Several neighbors saw them passing the widow teacher and the widower rancher, together at dawn with snow in their hair. At her doorstep, Asa hesitated. Maribel Mrs. Holloway, about last night. We survived a storm, she said simply. That's all anyone needs to know. That's not what I meant. I know. She smiled softly. Thank you for getting us through, for the conversation. Wasn't just me doing the getting through, he said. Then, louder. Come on, boy. Let's get home before your old dad freezes solid. She watched them ride away, 2 figures dark against the white landscape. Inside, she found her journal and wrote, Dear Samuel. I spent the night talking with another man. Not improperly, his son was there. A blizzard raged outside, but we talked as I haven't talked since you died, about loss and loneliness and the possibility of after. I'm not replacing you. No one could. But perhaps there's room in a life for more than one love. Perhaps a heart can hold past and future both. Is that betrayal or blessing? I no longer know. I only know the storm has passed and I'm still here, and maybe that's answer enough. Your Maribel April sunshine brought warmth and purpose to Cedar Ridge. Maribel stood in the abandoned church, surveying the dust and disrepair with a critical eye. The building had good bone-solid walls, a sound roof despite some missing shingles, windows that only needed cleaning to let light pour in again. It's a shame to let it sit empty, she'd told Mrs. Patterson the day before. The town needs a gathering place, perhaps a reading room, somewhere people could borrow books. The older woman had sniffed dismissively. Books don't save souls, Mrs. Holloway. No, Maribel had agreed quietly. But they might save minds. And sometimes that's a start. Now she stood alone in the dusty sanctuary, imagining possibilities. The pews could be rearranged to create reading nooks. The altar area would make a perfect children's corner. The small room off the side could hold donated books. She already had promises from several families willing to share their modest libraries. You planning to move in? She turned to find Asa in the doorway, tools in hand. She'd mentioned her idea during their last Sunday sitting, but hadn't expected him to appear. Just dreaming, she admitted. It's too much work for one person. Good thing you're not one person anymore. He set down his toolbox, surveying the space with a practiced eye. Roof needs patching first, then the broken window boards. Might take a few Saturdays. I didn't ask. You didn't have to. He was already examining a damaged pew. Elijah's excited about the idea. Boy's read every book you've lent him twice over. They worked in companionable rhythm, Maribel cleaning while Asa assessed repairs, as she wiped years of dust from a window, revealing colored glass she hadn't noticed before. He made notes about needed supplies. Find anything interesting? He asked, noticing her discovery. Look. She pointed to the small stained glass panel, a simple design of wheat stalks bending in wind. It's beautiful. I wonder who made it. Asa joined her, standing close enough that she could smell sawdust and leather. Clara's mother. She did all the windows before she passed. Clara was maybe 10 years old, used to sit and watch her work. You have history here. Everyone has history somewhere. He touched the glass gently. Question is what you do with it. Let it bury you or build on it. They stood together in the colored light, two people intimately acquainted with burial and tentatively learning construction. Then Asa cleared his throat and returned to his measurements, the moment dissolving but not disappearing. By noon, they'd made significant progress. Maribel had cleared cobwebs and scrubbed floors, while Asa had created a list of repairs, organized by urgency. They sat on the church steps to rest, sharing water from her canteen. This is good, he said, gesturing at the building. Having a purpose for it again. Clara would have liked the idea. Samuel, too. He always said empty churches were like unplanted fields, waste of good ground. Smart man. He was... She smiled at a memory. Though he also tried to fix our roof himself once and nearly fell through. Some things need proper craftsmen. Lucky for you, I've got experience with roofs. Asa stood, brushing off his pants. I'll come back tomorrow with supplies, if you're sure about this. I'm sure. He nodded, then surprised her by adding, Bring Elijah with you next time. Boy should see his ma's windows getting used again. The following Saturday, half the town seemed to have heard about the project. Mrs. Jameson arrived with her husband and cleaning supplies. The Hartley family brought lumber they'd been saving. Even skeptical Mrs. Patterson appeared with a box of books and a grudging offer to help sort them. Elijah worked beside his father, carefully sanding rough edges on damaged pews. Maribel caught him running his fingers over the wheat window, tears tracking silent down his young face. Your grandmother was an artist, she told him softly. Ma used to say I had her hands, he whispered. Said maybe I'd make beautiful things too someday. You already do. Every perfect letter you form, every story you write that's making something beautiful. The boy leaned against her slightly. Seeking comfort, she freely gave. Across the room, Asa watched them with an expression she couldn't quite read, gratitude mixed with something deeper, more complicated. As the weeks passed, the abandoned church transformed. Word spread beyond Cedar Ridge, and books arrived from neighboring towns. A traveling merchant donated a set of encyclopedias. The banker's wife, who'd barely acknowledged Maribel before, brought curtains for the windows. Seems you're making believers out of skeptics. Asa observed one evening. They were alone in the church, applying finishing touches before the grand opening. Believers in books, perhaps. That's enough for now. Is it? He set down his paintbrush, studying her. What about you? What do you believe in? The question hung between them, weighted with more than theology. Maribel considered her words carefully. I believe in work that helps people, in children learning to read, She paused, then met his eyes directly. In second chances, in finding grace in unexpected places. That sounds like faith to me. A different kind, maybe the only kind that matters. He returned to painting, but added quietly, I'm starting to believe again too. Not in the old ways, but in tomorrow, in possibilities. She knew he meant more than the library, More than books and buildings. The knowledge warmed her like summer sunshine. Opening day arrived bright and clear. Maribel stood before the transformed space, marveling at what community effort had accomplished. Bookshelves lined the walls. Comfortable chairs clustered near windows. The children's corner bright with donated cushions and toys. Asa appeared at her shoulder. Elijah beside him in his Sunday best, the shirt she'd given him, properly mended now by his father's improving hand. "You did this," Asa said quietly. "We did this, all of us. You sparked it, saw possibility where others saw waste." His voice dropped lower. "You do that with everything, everyone." Before she could respond, townspeople began arriving. Children raced to explore the shelves, while adults admired the restoration. Even the traveling preacher, in town for his monthly service, expressed approval. "Though I must say," he added to Maribel, "it's unusual to find a minister's widow so enterprising." "I'm just a teacher," she replied evenly, "trying to serve my community as best I can." "Still," he persisted, "without your husband's guiding hand." "Mrs. Holloway has guidance enough." Asa's voice cut through, firm and final. He stood beside her, not touching but unmistakably present. Her work speaks for itself. The preacher retreated, clearly unsettled by the widower's defense of the widow. But others had noticed too the way Asa naturally positioned himself at her side. How Elijah grabbed her hand to show her something, the three of them moving together like family. That evening, after the crowds had gone and the library was quiet, they sat together in what had become their pew, no longer the last row but not the first either, somewhere in the middle where the light was good for reading. "Thank you," Maribel said, "for defending me earlier." "And didn't do it for thanks." "Why then?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching dust motes dance in the sunset light through Clara's mother's windows. "Because you've given Elijah back his smile. Because you saw something worth saving in this old building. Because you—" He stopped, but his hand found hers on the pew between them. Not holding, just touching fingertips against fingertips. A connection as delicate as the moment. "I can't replace her," Maribel whispered. "I wouldn't want to." "Don't want replacing. Want." He turned his hand palm up. An invitation. Want what comes after. Want new stories, not rewritten old ones. She laced her fingers through his. Two people holding hands in a repurposed church, surrounded by books and possibility. "I should tell you," she said softly. "I still write him letters, every night. It might never stop." "I still make her coffee, every morning." His thumb traced gentle circles on her hand. "Maybe that's okay. Maybe loving what was doesn't mean we can't love what is." They sat as shadows lengthened, hands clasped, hearts cautiously opening. Through the windows, Clara's mother's wheat stalks caught the last light, bending but not breaking in their eternal glass wind. The afternoon sun slanted through the schoolhouse windows, casting long shadows across the empty desks. Maribel was organizing papers when she heard the door open, not the bustling entrance of children, but measured adult steps. Asa stood in the doorway, hat in hand, an unusual tension in his shoulders. Behind him, Elijah clutched a piece of paper, his young face serious as a judge. "Mrs. Holloway." Asa began, then stopped, seeming to wrestle with words. That is, Elijah has something he'd like to ask." The boy stepped forward, extending the paper with both hands. Maribel recognized his careful penmanship. Though the writing showed signs of many drafts, words crossed out, rewritten, worried over. "Would you read it, please?" Elijah whispered. She unfolded the paper, aware of both pairs of eyes watching her intently. The message was simple but profound. Asterisk. "Dear Mrs. Holloway, Pa doesn't know how to pray anymore. He tries sometimes, but the words get stuck. I remember some prayers from when Ma was here, but not all of them. You were a minister's wife. Could you help us remember how we would be very grateful? Your student, Elijah McCrae, asterisk. Maribel's throat tightened. She looked from the earnest boy to his father, who stood rigid with vulnerability, allowing his son to voice what he couldn't. "Oh, Elijah," she said softly. "That's a very brave thing to ask." "Is it?" The boy's voice held hope and uncertainty in equal measure. "Very brave and honest." She folded the letter carefully, treating it with the reverence it deserved. "But I should tell you something. I'm not sure I remember how to pray either. The words get stuck for me too." Elijah's face fell slightly, but Asa spoke up, his voice rough. "Maybe that's why you're the right person to ask. Someone who understands the sticking." She met his eyes, saw the trust there, the willingness to be vulnerable not just for himself, but for his son. These two had opened their hearts to her, offering their broken faith like a gift. "I could try," she said slowly. "We could try together, but it might not sound like the prayers you remember." "That's okay," Elijah said quickly. "Pa says different doesn't mean wrong. Your pa's a wise man." She gestured to the bench. "Sit with me." They arranged themselves on either side of her, Elijah small and eager, Asa careful but present. The schoolhouse felt different with them here, less like her professional space, more like home. "First," she said, "tell me what you remember about prayer, what it felt like when your mother did it." Elijah scrunched his face in concentration. "Warm, like when she tucked me in, she'd put her hand on my head and say words that made everything feel safer." "That's beautiful. Prayer can be like that, like a blanket of words." She turned to Asa. "What about you? What do you remember?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, purpose, like the day had a shape to it, beginning and ending with something bigger than just surviving. "Yes," she breathed, "the shape of things. I remember that too." "But how do we get it back?" Elijah asked. "The warm, safe shape." Maribel considered carefully. These two had trusted her with their spiritual hunger. She wouldn't feed them empty platitudes. "What if we start simple?" she suggested. "Not with formal prayers, but with noticing, saying thank you for small things, asking for help with real needs, speaking to God like writing letters to someone far away." "You write letters," Elijah observed. "Pa told me, to your husband in heaven." She glanced at Asa, who looked apologetic but not sorry. "I do. It helps me feel connected to him." "Could we write letters to God or to Ma?" The boy's eagerness was painful in its purity. We could speak them, or..." She took a breath, stepping into unknown territory. "We could start right now, together. Would you like that?" Both McCrae men nodded, Elijah eagerly, Asa with careful determination. "All right, let's join hands." She extended hers, feeling Elijah's small fingers on one side, Asa's calloused palm on the other. The circle closed, and for a moment they just breathed together. "I don't know the right words anymore," she began quietly. "So I'll just speak what's true. We're three people who've lost important things. We're trying to find our way. We're grateful for..." She paused, then continued. "For warm stoves on cold days. For books that take us places. For horses that know the way home. For hands that mend things. For teachers who share their bread," Elijah added softly. "For boys who aren't afraid to ask hard questions." Asa continued, his voice steady now. "Yes," Maribel said, "for all of that. And we ask. We ask for help with what's hard, with loneliness, with remembering, with learning to trust again, with nightmares," Elijah whispered. "With guilt," Asa added, barely audible. "With doubt," Maribel finished. "We ask for help with all of it, not to make it disappear, but to carry it better. Together." She paused, wondering how to end. In the silence, Elijah began to hum soft and uncertain, but unmistakably, "Come, thou fount," his mother's hymn that his father sometimes hummed while working. After a moment, Asa joined him, his deeper voice steadying the melody. Maribel found herself humming too, then softly singing words she thought she'd forgotten. "Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace." They sang quietly, imperfectly, but together. When the last note faded, they sat in silence that felt full rather than empty. "Was that prayer?" Elijah asked eventually. "I think so," Maribel said. "A different kind than you might remember, but prayer nonetheless." "It felt warm," the boy said with satisfaction, "and shaped, like things fit together better." Asa squeezed her hand before letting go. "Thank you for not pretending to have answers you don't have, for being willing to search with us. That's all any of us can do. I think, search together." They rose to leave, but Elijah turned back at the door. "Mrs. Holloway, could we do this again? Maybe every week." She looked at Asa, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'd like that. Perhaps Thursday evenings after supper, but before full dark." "Thursday's good," Asa confirmed. "We'll bring candles. Make it proper-like." After they left, Maribel sat in the gathering dusk, processing what had just happened. She'd been asked to teach prayer by people who trusted her empty hands more than others' full ones. The irony might have been bitter once. Now it felt like grace. That night, she wrote, "Dear Samuel, they asked me to teach them to pray me, who rails at heaven nightly. But perhaps that's why I could help. I know the language of spiritual emptiness, can translate between faith and its absence." We made a strange prayer tonight, the three of us. More conversation than petition, more honesty than reverence. You might not recognize it as prayer at all, but something happened in that circle of joined hands, something small and real and good. I think you'd understand. You always said God heard the heart more than the words. These three hearts are trying so hard to hear and be heard. Still your Maribel *. Thursday evening came soft with spring warmth. Maribel had debated where to hold their gathering. The schoolhouse felt too formal, the church too loaded with memory. Finally, she'd arranged chairs in a corner of the new library, where lamplight made the space intimate and books stood witness like patient friends. Asa and Elijah arrived promptly, carrying candles as promised. They arranged them on the small table she'd prepared, creating a circle of light. "It's nice here," Elijah said, looking around. "Peaceful." "That's what we're after," Maribel agreed. "A peaceful place to practice being open." They sat, and she waited to see if they'd reach for hands again. Elijah extended his immediately, natural as breathing. Asa followed, his fingers warm and steady around hers. "What should we talk to God about tonight?" she asked. "The planting," Asa said. "Season's coming fast." "My arithmetic test tomorrow," Elijah added. "Those are good things to mention, but maybe first, what are we thankful for since last week?" And so they began to build a practice not of formal prayers, but of shared reflection, gratitude, honest need. Sometimes they sang fragments of half-remembered hymns. Sometimes they sat in silence. Always, they held hands, that simple connection anchoring them. One evening, Elijah asked, "Do you think Ma hears us?" Maribel looked to Asa, letting him answer his son's deep question. "I think," Asa said slowly, "that love doesn't stop at death. So yes, somehow, I think she knows we're trying." "What about Mr. Holloway?" Elijah asked Maribel. "Does he hear your letters?" "I hope so. But even if not, writing them helps me hear myself. Understand what I'm feeling. That's valuable too." "Maybe that's what prayer is," the boy said thoughtfully. "Helping us hear ourselves and each other better. Out of the mouths of babes. Again." Maribel squeezed his hand. This wise child who asked the hardest questions and accepted the most honest answers. As spring deepened toward summer, their Thursday gatherings became as fixed as Sunday services, more so, for they never missed one. Word spread, as word always did in Cedar Ridge, the widow teaching the widower and his son to pray. Some saw scandal in it. Others saw hope. Let them talk, Asa said one evening when Maribel mentioned the gossip. They don't understand what this is. What is it? She asked, genuinely curious how he'd define their strange practice. He thought for a moment. Family, he said finally. This is what family does. Holds each other up when standing alone is too hard. Family. The word hung in the air like a blessing, unexpected and perfect. Elijah grinned, young heart accepting what adult minds might complicate. I like that, the boy said. Being family. Maribel blinked away sudden tears. These two McCrae men having found the exact words her heart needed. So do I, she whispered. So do I. The June heat had settled over Cedar Ridge like a heavy blanket, making the schoolhouse stifling by midday. Maribel dismissed her students early, watching them scatter to swimming holes and shaded porches. Only Thomas Hartley lingered, and she could see his mother waiting outside, lips pursed in familiar disapproval. Run along, Thomas, Maribel said gently. Your mother's waiting. The boy grabbed his things but paused at the door. Mrs. Holloway, my ma says you're doing wrong, spending time with the McCraes, but you don't seem wrong to me. Thank you. Thomas, sometimes people see what they expect to see, not what really is. After he left, she began tidying the classroom, trying to ignore the way Mrs. Hartley's disapproval had shifted lately from cold to actively hostile. The Thursday prayer gatherings had become common knowledge, twisted by gossip into something unseemly. Casting spells, more like. She'd overheard Mrs. Patterson say, a widow leading a widower astray, using his boy to do it. The accusations stung, but what worried Maribel more was how they might affect Asa and Elijah. They didn't deserve to be touched by scandals simply for seeking spiritual comfort. That evening, she was preparing for their Thursday gathering when Reverend Douglas arrived. The circuit preacher visited monthly, and she'd managed to avoid him thus far. But here he stood at her door, sweating in his black coat, face set in righteous determination. Mrs. Holloway, may I come in? She stepped aside reluctantly. Reverend Douglas. He entered her small home, eyes taking in every detail, the books, the sewing basket, Samuel's Bible still on the side table. His gaze lingered on the latter. I've heard disturbing reports. He began without preamble. About gatherings you're conducting, prayer meetings. They say, though several upstanding citizens question what kind of prayers a woman who refuses church attendance could possibly offer. I'm helping a father and son reconnect with their faith after loss, Maribel said evenly. Surely that's Christian work. Christian work should be done through proper channels. You're not ordained. Mrs. Holloway, your husband was the minister, not you. My husband is dead. The words came sharper than intended. And the McCraes asked for my help specifically because I understand that kind of loss. And that's another matter. His face reddened. The impropriety of your association with Mr. McCrae, unchaperoned meetings, the boy calling you family. Elijah is 8 years old. He's hardly a chaperone, and he's certainly allowed to feel affection for his teacher. You know what I mean, the appearance of evil. The only evil I see is in minds that twist kindness into scandal. Maribel stood straighter. If you've come to threaten me, Reverend, please be direct about it. He sputtered at her boldness. The church council is meeting Sunday. Your position at the school will be discussed. I'd hoped you might see reason before then. Perhaps agree to cease these irregular gatherings. A knock interrupted them. Asa stood at the door. Elijah beside him, both dressed in their clean clothes for Thursday prayer. Their faces showed they'd heard at least part of the conversation. "Evening, Reverend," Asa said coolly. "Mrs. Holloway, are we early?" "Not at all," Maribel replied. "Reverend Douglas was just leaving." The preacher looked between them, his disapproval palpable. "Mr. McCrae, surely you see how this appears. A respectable man like yourself." "Respectable?" Asa stepped inside, placing himself subtly between the Reverend and Maribel. "I wasn't respectable when I stopped coming to church after Clara died. Wasn't respectable when I let my boy go motherless and godless for 3 years. Only became respectable when Mrs. Holloway helped us find our way back to something like faith. Through improper channels, through kindness, through honesty, through being willing to sit with us in our doubt instead of preaching at us from certainty." Asa's voice remained level, but steel ran through it. "If that's improper, then I'll take improper over your kind of proper any day." Reverend Douglas turned to Elijah. "Boy, wouldn't you rather have real church proper Sunday school?" Elijah pressed closer to his father. "Mrs. Holloway teaches us to talk to God like he's really listening. In Sunday school, they just made me memorize things. I like Mrs. Holloway's way better." The Reverend's face darkened further. "This is exactly what I mean. Corrupting a child's understanding." "That's enough." Asa's voice cut like a blade. "You'll not speak against Mrs. Holloway in her own home, and you'll not upset my boy. I think you should leave. The council will hear about this." "Good. Tell them Asa McCrae stands with Mrs. Holloway. Tell them if they drive her out, they lose us too, permanent-like." The threat hung in the air. The McCrae Ranch was one of the largest in the area, their business important to the town's economy. More than that, Asa was respected, his word carrying weight despite his absence from formal worship. Reverend Douglas left without another word, his stiff back radiating indignation. As his footsteps faded, Maribel sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I never meant to bring trouble to you both." "You didn't bring nothing we didn't invite." Asa knelt beside her chair, looking up with intense eyes. "Maribel, Mrs. Holloway don't let them chase you off. Not when—" "When what?" He glanced at Elijah, who nodded encouragingly. "When we were planning to ask you something important tonight." "Pa's been practicing all week," Elijah added, bouncing slightly with excitement. "Practicing what do?" Asa stood, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture she'd come to recognize. "This ain't how I planned it, with that fool preacher stirring things up. But maybe that makes it more important to say now." He took a breath, then met her eyes directly. "Maribel Holloway, you've brought light back into our lives. You've taught us to pray again, to hope again, to be a family again. Elijah and we'd like to make it official. Would you consider, that is, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The world seemed to stop. Maribel looked between them, Asa earnest and vulnerable, Elijah practically glowing with hope, these two who'd walked with her through grief into something new, something precious. She stopped, overwhelmed. "Asa, I'm honored, but the town, the council marrying me might make things worse for you." "Hang the town, hang the council." He took her hands, work-rough thumbs gentle on her knuckles. "I'm not asking what they think. I'm asking what you think, what you feel. You know I still write to Samuel, still carry that grief. And I still make Clara's coffee. We're not asking each other to forget. We're asking if we can build something new alongside what was." His voice dropped. "I love you, Maribel. Not instead of Clara in addition to her, different, but just as real." "I want you to be my ma." Elijah burst out, unable to contain himself longer. "I know you can't replace my first ma, but maybe I could have two, one in heaven and one here." Tears spilled down Maribel's cheeks. "Oh, sweet boy, I would be honored to be your mother here on earth." "And my wife," Asa prompted gently. "Here on earth?" She looked at this man who'd entered her life as silent as shadow and become steady as sunrise, who'd shared her grief and helped transform it into something bearable, who offered not to erase her past but to help write her future. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Elijah whooped, throwing himself at them both in an exuberant hug. Asa's arms came around them all, and for a moment they stood there, a family already in heart, soon to be in law. "The council won't like it," Maribel felt compelled to warn. "Then we'll marry before they can object. This Saturday, if you're willing. Reverend Douglas won't do it, but there's a justice of the peace in Millbrook who will." "So soon?" "Why wait? We've been heading here since that first Sunday you walked into the church out of the rain. Every conversation, every prayer, every moment, it's all been leading to this." She thought of their journey, two broken people finding each other in an empty church, slowly learning to speak again, pray again, hope again. He was right. This had been building all along, as natural and inevitable as spring following winter. "Saturday, then," she agreed, heart singing despite the challenges ahead. "Can I tell everyone?" Elijah asked eagerly. "After Saturday," Asa said. "Let's make it official first. But yes, then you can tell the whole world if you want." They attempted their usual Thursday prayer after that, but joy kept breaking through in laughter and tears and spontaneous hugs. Finally, they gave up on formality and simply sat together, hands linked, hearts full. "Thank you," Asa said quietly as they prepared to leave, "for saying yes despite everything, for being brave enough to choose us. Thank you for asking, for seeing me as more than a scandal or a widow or a problem to be solved." She squeezed his hand. "For seeing me as myself. Always have. From that first day in the rain, I saw you." After they left, Maribel sat in the lamplight and wrote, "Dear Samuel, I'm getting married Saturday. It feels strange to write those words to you. My first love, my foundation, but I think you'd understand. You always said God's love was infinite, that loving more didn't mean loving less. Asa is a good man. He sees my grief as part of me, not something to be fixed. He offers partnership, not rescue. And Elijah, that sweet boy, has already claimed half my heart. I'll still write to you, still remember, but now I'll also build new memories, new love, new life. Both and not either or. Thank you for teaching me how to love well. I'll use those lessons to love this new family you'd surely approve of. Forever your Maribel. And now Asa's to *. Saturday dawned clear and bright. Maribel dressed in her best dress, not black, but deep blue like hope emerging from darkness. Asa waited at the door with Elijah and a small bouquet of prairie flowers. "Ready?" he asked. She looked at these two who'd chosen her, scandal and all, who offered not perfection but possibility, who met her in her grief and walked with her toward joy. "Ready," she said, and stepped into her new life. The Sunday morning after their quiet wedding dawned with unusual clarity. Maribel woke in her new home, the McCrae ranch house, to the sound of Asa making coffee in the kitchen. 2 cups, she noticed with a smile. Old habits transformed into new rituals. "Morning, Mrs. McCrae," he said softly as she entered the kitchen. The name still felt foreign on her ears, yet right somehow. "Good morning." Elijah burst through the door, already dressed in his Sunday clothes. "Can we tell everyone today, please?" Asa and Maribel exchanged glances. They'd known this moment would come. Cedar Ridge would have to learn of their marriage eventually. They'd simply hoped for a bit more time. "After church," Asa decided. "We'll attend the service together, as a family." Maribel's breath caught. "Asa, I haven't been to a proper service in over a year." "Neither have I, not regular-like. But maybe it's time, not for them, for us, to stand together in front of God and everybody, honest about who we are now." The church bell rang across the prairie as they walked into town. Elijah between them, barely containing his excitement. Heads turned as they approached the church. The widow, the widower, and the boy, walking together like— "Is that a wedding ring, Mrs.?" Jameson's sharp eyes missed nothing. "It is," Maribel replied calmly, taking Asa's offered arm as they climbed the church steps. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the gathered congregation like wind through wheat. Reverend Douglas, already at the pulpit, faltered mid-greeting as they entered. They walked down the aisle, not hurrying, not hiding, and sat in the last pew, their pew, where it had all begun with two broken people sitting in silence. Now they sat as a family, hands linked, heads high. The service proceeded with palpable tension. Reverend Douglas stumbled over his sermon, clearly struggling between his prepared message and the desire to address the scandal sitting in his sanctuary. The congregation kept turning to stare. Hymns sung distractedly. When it came time for community prayers, Asa stood. "I'd like to give thanks," he said, voice carrying clear and strong, "for second chances, for finding faith in unexpected places, for the woman who taught my son and me how to pray again, who agreed yesterday to become my wife and Elijah's mother." The church erupted. Gasps, exclamations, Mrs. Patterson actually clutching her chest as if physically struck, but also Maribel noticed with surprise some smiles. "Mrs. Garrett nodding approvingly, the blacksmith's wife wiping tears. "This is highly irregular," Reverend Douglas began. "So was sitting in an empty church for 3 years, unable to pray," Asa continued. "So was a minister's widow losing her faith and finding it again and teaching others to doubt honestly. Irregular seems to be how God works in our lives." "Here, here," called out Jacob Morrison, the banker who donated books to the library. "About time you two made it official." "Jacob," his wife scolded, but she was smiling too. Reverend Douglas pounded his pulpit. "This is a house of worship, not a—" "Not a what?" Maribel stood beside her husband, finding her voice. "Not a place for celebrating love, not a place for recognizing how God works through broken people to create wholeness, not a place for joy when two families become one. You abandoned this church, Mrs. Holloway." "McCrae," she corrected firmly. "And I abandoned empty ritual, not faith. There's a difference." "A significant one," added Dr. Bennett from his pew. "I've watched Mrs. McCrae, both Mrs. McCraes serve this community with grace. Clara through traditional means, Maribel through new ones, both serving God in their way." The mention of Clara should have stung, but it didn't. It felt right in acknowledgement that love multiplied rather than divided. If the church can't celebrate when lost sheep find their way home, even if by unconventional paths, then what good is it? This from elderly Mrs. Whitman, whose grandson Maribel tutored for free. More voices rose in support, and Maribel realized with wonder that while some had gossiped, others had been watching, seeing the quiet good she and Asa did together. The Saturday bread, the mended clothes for struggling families, the library that welcomed everyone. Reverend Douglas raised his hands for silence. "The church council will need to discuss—" "Discuss what?" Asa's voice cut through. "Whether two widowed people have the right to find happiness again. Whether a woman who teaches children to read and a man who works honest land can make a family. Discuss all you want. We'll be living our lives, serving our neighbors, raising our son." "Our son," Elijah repeated proudly, grabbing both their hands. In that moment, something shifted in the church. Perhaps it was the sight of the 8-year-old boy beaming between his new parents. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity of two people who'd found love after loss. Perhaps it was simply time for change. "I motion," said Judge Porter, standing, "that this congregation formally congratulate Mr. and Mrs. McCrae on their marriage and welcome them as a family into our community." "Seconded," called several voices at once. Reverend Douglas looked as if he'd swallowed a lemon. "This is highly—" "Irregular. Yes, you've said—" "Mrs." Garrett interrupted. So was Ruth gleaning in Boaz's fields. So was the woman at the well. Seems to me God specializes in irregular. A vote was called. It wasn't unanimous misses. Patterson and her circle remained firmly disapproving, but the majority carried it easily. The church that had whispered scandal now offered acceptance, if not complete understanding. After the service, people approached them, some awkwardly, some warmly, all curiously. How long had this been developing? When had they known was Elijah happy?
"Look at his face,"
Maribel said to the last question. "Does he look happy to you?" The boy was practically glowing, telling anyone who'd listen about their Thursday prayers and Saturday baking and how his new ma was teaching him to write stories, not just letters. As the crowd thinned, the three of them stood outside the church, the building where Maribel and Asa had first sat in silent grief, where they'd slowly learned to speak again, where they'd just declared their new beginning.
"That went better than expected,"
Asa observed.
"Did it?"
Maribel laughed, slightly dizzy from the morning's intensity. "I couldn't tell if we were at a wedding reception or a trial. Both, maybe, but we're still standing." "Together," Elijah added, wrapping an arm around each parent. "Standing together." They walked home slowly, savoring the warmth of the sun and each other's company. At the ranch, they found several dishes on the porch, neighbors who hadn't been at church but wanted to acknowledge the marriage with the frontier's universal language of food. That evening, in what was becoming their new Sunday tradition, they sat in the library Maribel had helped create. But instead of the last pew of an empty church, they chose comfortable chairs near Clara's mother's wheat window, where light still danced through colored glass. "Should we pray?" Elijah asked.
"I think we've been praying all day,"
Maribel said.
"with our words, our actions, our choices."
"But maybe a thank you prayer," the boy persisted. "For making it through, for people being mostly nice, for being family."
"Yes,"
Asa agreed, reaching for their hands.
"Definitely a thank you prayer."
They sat in their circle, in the church that was now a library, in the town that was learning to accept them, in the life they were building from beautiful ruins. And Maribel found herself praying aloud, easily, honestly.
"Thank you for second chances, for love that expands rather than replaces, for sons who ask hard questions and fathers brave enough to change, for communities that can grow, for empty churches that become full libraries, for silent Sundays that become singing ones, for endings that become beginnings."
"Amen," Asa said firmly.
"Amen,"
Elijah echoed.
"Amen," Maribel whispered, and meant it.
Later, alone in her new study, she wrote one last letter. Asterisk, Dear Samuel. Asterisk. Today I sang in church for the first time since you died. Not perfectly, not without pain, but with hope. The town that gossiped about the godless widow today voted to accept her as wife, mother, member. Asterisk. I think you would have liked how it happened, messy and real and irregular. You always said God's grace was wider than human judgment. Today, I believe you. I'll keep writing to you, but less often now, not because I'm forgetting, but because I'm living. Living fully, living gratefully, living loved. Asterisk, thank you for teaching me how to love well enough to love again. Asterisk, your Maribel, always your Maribel. And now Asa's too, and Elijah's ma, and whoever else God calls me to be asterisk. She sealed the letter and placed it with all the others, a testament to grief transformed, but not erased. Then she went to join her family for evening meal, where two kinds of grace would be said, Asa's simple farmer's prayer and her own sung blessing. Different voices, different traditions. One table, one love, spacious enough for all their ghosts and all their hopes. The church bell rang the evening hour across Cedar Ridge, and in a house where coffee was made for the living and the dead, where letters bridged earth and heaven, where a small boy had two mothers and neither was forgotten, they sat down together to break bread. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not instead of, but in addition to. Not perfect, but whole.
Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, loss, and finding faith again in the American frontier. I hope Maribel and Asa's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of their story. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories. 1850, give this video a like. And don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of hope and healing from America's frontier days. Until next time, partners.